Okay, guys, here is a review of the latest Jacques Baud's interview with Geopolitics Profonde. Once again, this political channel on YouTube, a French one, a French-speaking one. So I believe you could eventually find the subtitles and the full interview with the link that I will leave in the description of this video. But once again, what I want to do is to provide a resume for you who do not speak French, wherever you are. And once again, you know the description I provided about Jacques Baud. I'm sure you know Jacques Baud is speaking actually English, and he's doing a lot of interviews in English as well. But nonetheless, here it is. Jacques Baud is an ex-colonel of the Swiss intelligence, and the Swiss government was actually collaborating with NATO in the past, and he was providing this kind of liaison with NATO. And so basically Jacques Baud is now a renowned geopolitician, and he's doing regular interviews in French, in English, with different kind of media, and including Geopolitics Profonde. So just to provide a quick introduction and immediate context, the interviewer from Geopolitics Profonde welcomes Jacques Baud and introduces his key books focusing on the Russian warfare and the Ukraine conflict. The discussion opens with the recent headlines, namely alleged Russian drones attack on the Polish border, which the Polish government frames as aggression. Jacques Baud questions this narrative, noting that Russian missiles and drones are typically precise and unlikely to stray off into Poland. He suspects Ukrainian misinformation, referencing a past incident where an errant Ukrainian missile killed 2 people in Poland, but was immediately and wrongly blamed on Russia by Ukrainian and Western media a couple of months or years ago. Okay, so now let's move into the meat of the conversation. Guys, for those who have followed my other review of interviews of Jacques Baud and others, like Colonel McGregor and others, well, you know the drill. So you will have a banner with all the chapters and the subjects that are treated in the interview. But once again, I believe Geopolitics Profonde, they're doing sufficient views in order to be granted the possibility to have English subtitles or English speaker at the same time. So you can select actually in the settings if you want to have English or French, I believe. So now let's move into the meat of the conversation. So the first element covered in the interview is Ukraine, internal crisis and external isolation. Jacques Baud elaborates on Ukraine's growing internal pressures, President Zelensky's declining popularity, direct attacks and accusation from former and current officials, increasing forced conscription, and the growing resistance movements against the Kiev government. It notes that the population is increasingly unwilling to fight, and that protests and even armed opposition are rising, although they are underreported in Western media for whatever reason. Well, for obvious reasons. Externally, Ukraine's relationship with its neighbor are worsening. Slovakia, Hungary, and notably Poland. Hungary's hostility is partly due to the treatment of Hungarian minorities in Ukraine since 2014. Oh, that's strange. They were doing the same to Russia. Many countries, including Poland, are withdrawing over support and refusing to deploy forces in Ukraine. Jacques Baud argues Ukraine is becoming more isolated, not mainly supported only by struggling Western European powers such as France, Germany, and UK. You see in France that the prime minister of France was deposed, and now we are having some unrest in France all over the country, while the US has largely shifted to selling and not donating weapons to Ukraine anymore. Now, the West versus Russia, shifting alliances. Jacques Baud contrasts Ukraine's isolation with Russia's deepening integration with the rest of the world, focusing on organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and partnerships with China. It suggests that Ukraine increasingly tries to create escalation, hoping to draw more Western involvement for survival, given its military and resource depletion, due to the fact that now Trump doesn't want to give them weapons, but to sell them to Ukraine. Now, on Ukraine military situation, Jacques Baud traces Ukraine dependency on Western support back to May 2022, when Zelensky publicly stated Ukraine's defense relied entirely on Western help. He claims Russia's goal of demilitarization of Ukraine has succeeded. Ukraine survives now largely thanks to Western-provided therapeutic persistence. Jacques Baud asserts that the US is disengaging, knowing it cannot win, leaving Europe unable to compensate. European governments, in notes, cling to Ukraine support partly to distract their population from domestic failures, as we can see at the moment in France. Now, peace, ceasefire, and strategic impasse. Jacques Baud explores the semantic confusion between ceasefire and peace in Western political discourse. He observes that Western leaders, especially Trump and Macron, treat a ceasefire as synonymous with peace, while Russia sees it merely as a step in a wider process. He details how in Palestine, Trump managed a ceasefire, seen as the first step towards peace, and tried to apply the same logic to Ukraine. However, after repeated broken agreements, the Russians now require concrete results as a precondition to any ceasefire or peace process. Jacques Baud quotes Putin's June 2024 explanation. Russia doesn't reject ceasefire, but insists on two key preconditions for negotiations: Ukrainian withdrawal from four contested regions, the four oblasts, and withdrawal from NATO application. European, by contrast, for an unconditional ceasefire, which Baud characterizes as sophism, designed to placate their own public rather than facilitate genuine peace. Now, let's look into the failure of Western diplomacy as Jacques Baud approaches it. The Alaska summit, Jacques Baud claims, was not a negotiation, but an attempt by Trump to understand Russia's position. As subsequent meetings in Washington, Trump made clear there would be no ceasefire unless Russian terms were addressed. Jacques Baud criticizes European diplomatic efforts for being insular and self-referential, confining negotiations to within Western circles and avoiding dialogue with Russia. Jacques Baud argues European plans for deploying troops in Ukraine, estimated at 50,000, 30,000 soldiers, would have marginal deterrent effect and primarily serve to create tripwire conditions, a military presence designed to trigger wider NATO intervention if attacked. He also explained the concept of security guarantees as proposed by Ukraine in March 2022, diplomatic assurances by major powers, not troop deployment, to guarantee Ukrainian borders. Russia favored this multilateral guarantee model, but it was abandoned under Western pressure. Jacques Baud draws historical parallels to Switzerland neutrality in in 1815, Austria's neutrality in 1955, and Ukraine 1994 Budapest Security Guarantee Proposal, all suggesting multilateral guarantees by power blocs to maintain stable neutral states. He claims the best path for Ukraine will be such guarantees from both sides, but Western powers forced Ukraine to abandon this approach. Now, let's look into the conceptual divide, cooperation versus confrontation. Jacques Baud highlights a fundamental difference. Russia and the former Soviet Union have long advocated security through cooperation, while the Western powers rely on a confrontational approach, military-focused approach, actually. He sees Russia's advocacy of political and diplomatic mechanisms for long-term stability as superior to the West's persistent military confrontation. Now, the conversation was shifting to Middle East, Gaza, Israel, and negotiation. Now, shifting focus to the Middle East, Jacques Baud reacts to recent Israeli drone strikes in Doha targeting Hamas negotiators, noting Trump's strong condemnation. He describes Israeli attacks on negotiators as systematic and argues Israel routinely sabotages peace efforts by eliminating negotiators, citing the historical assassination of Count Bernadotte in 1948 as an early example of a tradition. Jacques Baud claims Arab states have consistently been open to dialogue, but Israel routinely thwarts meaningful negotiation, sometimes under US pressure, while eliminating key Arab and international negotiators or mediators. It recalls similar killings in Iran targeting Hamas officials and asserts that Israel treats the region as its exclusive domain, acting against neighbors with impunity. He emphasizes that Israel remains a country without internationally defined borders, having repeatedly expanded and consolidated territory by military force, not by referendum or international consent. Jacques Baud argues that every square meter of Israel was illegally acquired, and that the state was established in open violation of UN principles of self-determination. He further claims that Palestinian territories have more international legitimacy as defined entities than Israel itself. Jacques Baud explains that internally, Israel defined itself as an exclusively Jewish state, a principle outlined in its foundational laws. The refusal in 1947-1948 to hold a referendum led to an exclusive state for Jews, breaking previous traditions of shared peaceful coexistence. He states that most modern Israeli Jews are of European origin, having little historical connection to the region, and that the importation of European, especially Central Eastern European Jews, fundamentally disrupted sustained local Arab-Jewish coexistence. Jacques Baud draws parallels to Spain's Reconquista as another example of violent exclusivism, destroying centuries of peaceful pluralism. Now, the problem of Middle East and the European intervention. Jacques Baud repeatedly asserts that European-driven political doctrines such as Zionism lie at the root of the ongoing problems, while indigenous Jews in Palestine historically coexisted peacefully with Arabs. He explained that it was the arrival of European Jews shaped by exclusive ideologies that generated persistent conflict. and not, you know, the indigenous Jews that were living, you know, in Palestine for years before the arrival of the European Jews. Now, Israel actions in international law. Jacques Baud singles out Israel's repeated defiance of international law and UN resolutions, from the refusal to define borders, to the expansion into neighboring territories, to violent ending of peace initiatives like the Gaza aid flotillas. Jacques Baud claims Israel is without faith or law regarding humanitarian norms, and notes the possibility of expulsion from the UN, since Israeli membership was conditional and on compliance with international humanitarian law, a requirement he claims Israel consistently violates. He points out that only US veto and small Pacific client states currently keep Israel from facing real repercussions at the UN. Now, Middle East historical context and outcomes. Jacques Baud references the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which stipulated that establishing a Jewish home will not harm non-Jewish community, a condition he claims was ignored from the outset. He traces the origins of the term Palestinian, showing it was historically applied both to Jews and Arabs under British mandate, and claims that Arab Palestine in 1947 advocated for binational coexistence, while Jews pushed for an exclusive state. He concludes by observing that long-term peaceful coexistence between Jews and Arabs was commonplace across the Mediterranean, only broken by European originating exclusivist projects like Zionism. Okay, now summary and final remarks about the interview of Jacques Baud with Geopolitics Profonde. Throughout the interview, Jacques Baud advocates for solutions based on dialogue, mutual guarantees and multilateral diplomacy, whether addressing Ukraine or Palestine, Israel. He criticizes Western intervention and confrontation and champions models of security and coexistence drawn from Swiss and Australian neutrality, while warning against escalation, exclusivism, and policies that perpetuate conflict, like we see in Middle East. He closes with thanks and remarks about his books. Here it is, guys. That's what I could share with you about the review of the long interviews of Jacques Baud with Geopolitics Profonde. After this, I'll see you out there, and see you next time. Thanks. Bye bye.